Lewis Hamilton. Monaco, the circuit where pride outweighs points. Every corner whispers ego. Every mistake is broadcast to the world. In 2016, Mercedes ruled Formula One, but inside that silver empire raged a cold war. Hamilton versus Rosberg. They shared a garage, but not a soul between them. Qualifying is everything in Monaco. Overtaking is almost impossible. Track position decides destiny. Hamilton's car coughed on its first run. An ERS glitch, a few seconds of silence that felt like hours. Rosberg pounced. While Hamilton sat in the garage, Rosberg plastered his name at the top of the timesheets. When the system finally came back online, Hamilton bolted out of the pit lane like a man possessed. But the streets were now packed. Slow cars on outlaps, midfielders trying to stay out of the way, yellow flags flickering at the tunnel exit. And then came the line, sharp, sarcastic, immortal. "Is that guy even trying?" The radio crackled. Engineers froze. It wasn't a question. It was a sneer. Hamilton wasn't just frustrated. He was mocking another driver's existence on track. The tone carried contempt, the sound of a champion who couldn't believe anyone else deserved space on his road. When qualifying ended, Rosberg had the upper hand again. Hamilton's lap was compromised, his fury barely contained. Later interviews were polished, polite, but the world had already heard the real version, raw and ruthless. Fans divided overnight. Some called it confidence, others called it cruelty. That weekend became the purest snapshot of Hamilton's psyche, genius and ego dancing on a razor's edge. When you're the best, respect becomes optional, and Monaco 2016 was proof that even the greatest can lose patience when the throne feels threatened. Max Verstappen. Interlagos 2022. The air was thick with celebration. Red Bull had conquered everything that year. Verstappen was champion again, the youngest back-to-back winner since Schumacher. But dominance breeds entitlement, and on that day, the world saw it crystal clear. Final laps. Verstappen sat ahead of teammate Sergio Perez. The championship was done, but Perez still fought Charles Leclerc for second in the driver's standings. The team's plan was simple. If Max couldn't gain another place, he'd let Checo by for the extra points. Over the radio came the order. "Max, let Checo through." The response was colder than the São Paulo night. "I told you already. Don't ask me that again." No hesitation, no emotion, just refusal. The message wasn't for Perez. It was for the entire organization. The pit wall fell silent. On the cool-down lap, Checo's voice cracked through. "It shows who he really is." That single radio exchange detonated across the sport. Red Bull's image of unity shattered. Reporters swarmed. Fans flooded social media calling it betrayal, arrogance, payback. Perez had spent years defending Verstappen, even sacrificing wins to protect him. And now, with nothing at stake, Max wouldn't return a favor. Later, when asked to explain, Verstappen said he had his reasons. He never detailed them. He didn't need to. That vagueness was the ultimate power play, forcing everyone else to guess his motives while he walked away untouched. It was disrespect wrapped in dominance, a champion who believed his crown placed him above teamwork. Brazil 2022 exposed not the speed, but the psychology that once you rule the sport, saying no becomes the boldest victory of all. Fernando Alonso. Suzuka 2015, the home of Honda. Every corner of the grandstands was covered in red and white flags. The Japanese crowd waited to see their national engine roar again after years of absence. Instead, they watched a public execution on live radio. McLaren and Honda had reunited to recreate their legendary late 80s glory. But what rolled out of the garage was a slow, wheezing shadow of that legacy. The engine was underpowered. The energy recovery system failed constantly. And on Suzuka's long straights, the McLarens were sitting ducks. Alonso was being passed like a traffic cone by Saubers and Marussias, cars that had no business overtaking a two-time world champion. On lap 26, when he was blasted past again by a midfield driver, Alonso snapped. He pressed the radio button and let the entire world hear his rage. "GP2 engine! GP2! Ah!" The pit wall went dead silent. In the Honda hospitality suite, executives froze. The comment was a dagger to the heart of their national pride, being called a junior series manufacturer on home soil. Alonso didn't just criticize an engine. He humiliated an entire company in front of its own fans. After the race, team bosses downplayed it as heat-of-the-moment emotion, but the damage was was irreversible. Honda's engineers stopped sharing data freely with the team. Sponsors asked questions. Japanese media blasted front-page headlines calling it Alonso's insult. Yet Fernando never apologized. He knew he was right. He just didn't care that he was cruel. That moment was the perfect snapshot of Alonso. Brilliant enough to be right. Reckless enough to say it out loud. Suzuka 2015 wasn't a radio message. It was a public execution of respect. Sebastian Vettel. Sepang 2013 was hot, humid, and already boiling with tension inside Red Bull. Mark Webber led comfortably. Vettel sat behind him on worn tires. The team radio was clear. Multi-21. That code meant car number 2. Webber stays ahead of car number 1. Vettel. No fighting. No risks. But Vettel didn't believe in obedience. He believed in domination. Ignoring the command, he dove down the inside at over 180 miles per hour. Tires smoking. The two Red Bulls barely inches apart. For 3 laps, they fought like enemies. Wheels touching. Sparks flying. Vettel forced Webber offline and took the lead. The pit wall was stunned. No cheers, just shock. When they parked in Parc Fermé, Webber walked straight up to him and said into the microphone still live on broadcast, Multi-21, Seb. Multi-21. His tone wasn't anger. It was betrayal. Vettel shrugged, looked away, and took his trophy. The fallout was nuclear. Fans booed Vettel on the podium. Team principal Christian Horner called it unacceptable. Even Helmut Marko had to calm Webber from quitting on the spot. Yet Vettel never backed down. His excuse? I was racing. That was Vettel at his most disrespectful, smiling through the storm because he knew he was untouchable. It wasn't just a breach of team orders. It was a public power move that split Red Bull in two. He'd rather burn bridges than share credit. And from that day, the partnership that had won 4 titles was never the same again. Ayrton Senna. Suzuka was supposed to decide the championship. Again. The year before, Alain Prost had turned into Senna at the chicane, and the Frenchman walked away with the title, while Senna was disqualified on a technicality. For Ayrton, that humiliation never faded. By the time the 1990 Japanese Grand Prix came, revenge wasn't a subplot. It was the script. In qualifying, Senna took pole, but the FIA placed pole position on the dirty side of the track. He begged them to swap grid slots for safety. They refused. To him, it felt deliberate. Prost favored politics winning over fairness. The morning of the race, he told close friends, if he gets ahead at turn 1, he's not going to make it. When the lights went out, both cars rocketed off the line. Prost, in the Ferrari, edged slightly in front. Senna never lifted. At 170 miles per hour, he held the throttle open and speared into Prost's rear wheel. The impact hurled both into the gravel trap. Engines stalled, dust clouded, and just like that, the championship was over. Prost out, Senna world champion. The crowd was silent. Mechanics stared in disbelief. Later, when reporters asked if it was deliberate, Senna didn't dodge. He said Prost had wronged him in 1989. The officials had wronged him this year, and this was justice. The FIA threatened sanctions, but backed down under pressure. What Senna did that day was bigger than rivalry. It was rebellion. He weaponized his brilliance to make a point. If you deny him fairness, he'd deliver his own version of it. It was disrespect to the rules, to the officials, even to victory itself. And that's what made it unforgettable. Michael Schumacher. Monaco 2006. The track that defines precision. The driver who defines control. Schumacher was on provisional pole, but Alonso was closing in fast behind. Was the final minute of qualifying. The one stretch where every corner decides legacy. Then, at the Rascasse corner, Schumacher's Ferrari twitched, barely, and stopped dead. Yellow flags flew instantly. Alonso, arriving seconds later on a lap 0.2 faster, had to abort. The paddock erupted in suspicion. The telemetry showed no brake lockup, no engine issue, no attempt to move the car after stalling. It looked staged, too deliberate, too convenient. Overnight, Monaco's narrow streets echoed with one question. Did Schumacher just fake an accident to freeze the lap? The steward summoned him, reviewed every frame, and stripped his pole time. But even that ruling couldn't undo the damage. The trick had already worked. Alonso never got another chance. Rivals called it pathetic. Journalists called it the act of a desperate genius. And Schumacher? He smiled. Mistakes happen, he said. But everyone knew it wasn't a mistake. It was the calculated arrogance of a man who refused to lose, even if it meant twisting the game. Rascasse became more than a corner. It became a synonym for manipulation. For a driver who had conquered through talent, it was his most disrespectful masterpiece. The day he parked his car, not out of failure, but out of strategy. Kimi Raikkonen, Abu Dhabi, 2012. 2012. The desert heat shimmered over Yas Marina circuit, and Formula One's quietest man was about to deliver its most iconic outburst. Kimi Raikkonen had returned to the sport after 2 years away. Lotus had given him a car good enough to fight, but not dominate. Yet that day, he was in control, calm, clinical, unstoppable. But the Lotus pit wall wasn't calm. They couldn't help themselves. Lap after lap, they flooded his radio. Updates, deltas, gaps, warnings, reminders. It was nervous energy, the kind teams give when they don't trust victory until it's over. To Kimi, it was noise, distracting, unnecessary, insulting. And then, as if cutting through static, came that immortal line, "Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing." The tone was surgical. Not angry, not panicked, just annoyed that people kept interrupting his perfection. The pit wall went silent. Engineers exchanged glances. Commentators laughed. But deep down, everyone knew what it meant. Kimi didn't just want peace. He wanted control. He went on to win the race. His first victory since 2009. When he crossed the finish line, the radio crackled again. "Good job, Kimi. Well done." And his reply? Another masterpiece of disdain. "Yes, yes, yes. You don't have to keep reminding me every 10 seconds. It was poetry. Cold, dismissive poetry. That day, he didn't just win a race. He won Formula One's greatest meme, transforming irritation into immortality. To fans, it became legend. To his engineer, it was probably trauma. But that's what made Kimi different. His disrespect wasn't loud. It was elegant. He didn't need to scream or fight. He just ignored the world, did his job better than anyone else, and made the rest look foolish for doubting him. In a sport full of noise, Kimi Raikkonen's silence, and that one sentence, echoed the loudest. Nelson Piquet Sr. It's 1982, the Wild West of Formula One. Cars were fast, fragile, and dangerous. The men inside them, even more so. Nelson Piquet was defending world champion that year. Brazilian, brash, and brutally honest. He wasn't just fast. He was fiery. At the German Grand Prix in Hockenheim, Piquet was leading comfortably when he came up to lap Chilean driver Eliseo Salazar. The move should have been routine. A quick overtake on the inside. Wave. Gone. But Salazar closed the door too late. They touched wheels, and the both cars spun out into the grass. Race over. Piquet climbed out of his Brabham, ripped off his gloves, and stormed toward Salazar like a man possessed. The camera zoomed in just as he reached him, and then the world saw something that would never happen in modern Formula One. Piquet swung once, twice, then again. Punches connected with Salazar's helmet. He kicked him in the chest. Marshals tried to separate them, but Piquet wasn't done. He screamed in Portuguese, gesturing wildly toward the wrecked cars. Salazar stood motionless, absorbing the blows through his visor. The TV feed caught it all. Millions watched a Formula One world champion physically assault another driver mid-race. Later, reporters asked Piquet if he regretted it. He smirked. "No," he said. "He ruined my race. No PR apology. No corporate script. Just old-school rage. It wasn't smart. It wasn't diplomatic. But it was raw, human, and absolutely disrespectful. That fistfight defined a generation of drivers who didn't hide behind sponsorships or cameras. They said what they felt and threw punches when words failed. And for Nelson Piquet, the incident didn't tarnish his legend. It enhanced it. Fans still talk about it like a gladiator moment in a corporate era, because in that dusty patch of grass at Hockenheim, Piquet showed the unfiltered side of Formula One, where emotion outweighed etiquette and pride hit harder than any crash. Pastor Maldonado. Spa-Francorchamps is sacred ground. The track winds through the Ardennes like a cathedral built for courage. Flat-out corners, impossible weather, and zero forgiveness. But in 2011, that cathedral became the scene of a petty act that summed up Pastor Maldonado's entire reputation. Brilliant speed mixed with reckless spite. During quarter two, Lewis Hamilton was on a flyer when he came up behind the slower Williams of Maldonado. The two brushed wheels at the bus stop chicane. Barely a tap, nothing more than the sort of misunderstanding that happens 10 times a weekend. Session over, both men backed off to cruise to the pits. But Pastor wasn't finished. As Hamilton lined up to cross the control line, the Williams suddenly swerved. Bang! Carbon fiber exploded into the air. The hit looked deliberate because it was deliberate. The crowd gasped. Hamilton's engineer shouted over radio, "What was that?" Even the stewards couldn't process it at first. Retaliation in the the cool-down lap was unheard of. Replays showed Maldonado flick the steering wheel toward Hamilton, like a man settling a score with his car. Hamilton's McLaren limped back to the garage, bodywork shredded. Maldonado kept driving as if nothing had happened. Overnight, the paddock turned on him. Seasoned pros called it dangerous immaturity. He was handed a 5-place grid penalty, but the damage was deeper than points. It branded him forever. From that day, Maldonado stopped meaning rookie with potential and started meaning chaos waiting to happen. He didn't crash because he lost control. He crashed because he wanted to send a message. In Formula One, that's the purest form of disrespect, turning a weapon of precision into a weapon of spite. At Spa 2011, Pastor Maldonado didn't just lose his temper, he rewrote his identity. Romain Grosjean, exactly 1 year later, the same circuit witnessed something even more violent. Romain Grosjean's start at Spa 2012 was supposed to be clean. He was fighting for redemption after a string of collisions. Instead, he delivered the most catastrophic opening lap of the decade. The lights went out, and Grosjean launched like a bullet, but he cut across Lewis Hamilton's nose before the first corner. Contact. The Lotus shot sideways. Hamilton's McLaren rode up over Grosjean's rear wheel, and in a heartbeat, both became airborne. Fernando Alonso's Ferrari was next in line. The Lotus flew across his cockpit, missing his helmet by inches. Cars scattered, debris filled the sky, and by the time the smoke cleared, 4 title contenders were out before turn 1. Silence fell, then disbelief. Marshall sprinted through carbon shards while Alonso sat motionless, shaken but unhurt. Replays made jaws drop. The crash could easily have been fatal. Grosjean climbed out, visibly dazed, but the paddock's fury was instant. Hamilton's camp called it unacceptable. Alonso said he'd never seen anything so careless. The stewards agreed. They issued a 1-race ban, the first in nearly 20 years, for reckless disregard for safety. That penalty wasn't just about one crash. It was judgment on a pattern. 8 opening lap incidents in 12 races. Colleagues nicknamed him Romain the Destroyer. Sponsors threatened to walk. Even his team boss said he needed psychological help to control his aggression. And yet, the tragedy within the chaos was how close it came to changing F1 forever. If Alonso's head had been 2 inches higher, the story of Spa 2012 would have been about death, not discipline. That moment directly accelerated the FIA's push for the Halo cockpit protection years later. Grosjean apologized sincerely, but the world had already written the headline. Spa 2012 wasn't just a crash. It was the sport confronting its own fragility, and one man's loss of judgment became everyone's lesson in humility. For a split second, disrespect for space and caution nearly erased champions from history.